Bye.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. We were just laughing a little bit. It has a green room where you talk a little bit beforehand. Hi, everyone. I hope that everyone's doing well, that you've been blessed with a lovely spring day like we've had up here today. If you're from in other parts of the world, I hope that it's starting to get better as well after all the bad weather. We're seeing people from all over, from the US, from Germany, from all over in Scotland, from all over in the UK in general. So welcome, everyone. And if you were here in the previous event, welcome back. And if you weren't, we will share the link to the recording. So don't worry, you've not missed anything just yet. As you can see today, let me share my screen so that we can see the presentation, which is going to be so much prettier than me just ranting about things here. Give me 2 seconds. We're also going to be asking you some questions, so that's why it's so important to actually have the presentation. As you can see today, we're going to be talking about integrating trees in your farm business. So to do so, let me make sure, here we go. And now you can see this beautiful thing. I can't see anyone, which is probably a good thing. And to do so, we're going to be talking with James and Rosa, who have a homestead. And then on the other side of the farming equation is going to be Roger talking about what he's doing in Parkhill. But Clem's going to introduce them properly in a wee second. Before that, we would like to just let you know a little bit about why we're doing these webinars. This is a series of webinars and videos on agroforestry. And that's the interesting thing. You can not only watch this space, but Roger, Rosa, James, and Phil and Mike, who were in our previous webinar, have been also recording in their farm. So if you want to visit it, we're going to share the link in a wee second. And the first event, which was 2 weeks ago, we discussed how to make trees work on your croft. And as I mentioned, now we're going to be talking about integrating trees in your farms. And the final event, which is going to be on the 18th, is going to be a bit more interactive. This has been mostly talks. It's going to be discussion groups about agroforestry in Scotland. We'll tell you more about it in a second. The other thing that we're doing is to try to maximize all that you can learn from being part of these events is this Agroforestry Resources Hub. Again, something that we're going to be sharing in a wee second and also in the follow-up email. But here you can come and there's a lot of case studies, lots of interesting articles, and lots of links to other resources we can learn more about agroforestry in general, but also about grants related to agroforestry. So again, really inviting you to visit that afterwards. As I mentioned, here we go. That's Roger in all his glory in the picture for Parkhill Farm. There's a YouTube playlist where you can actually see all the videos that our farmers and crofters have been doing. And there are actually going to be more videos to come. So even after the event, please keep an eye on it. They're really interesting, short, 2 minutes, and you get everything that you need to know about a particular topic that they're touching upon. There's also a couple of events that are still coming before the winter officially ends. One is on mob grazing, a mob grazing Q&A on outwintering to reduce inputs. So that absolutely recommended. Next Thursday, 4th of March, you can register in our website. And again, finally, the last one of this 3 series of webinars, the Agroforestry in Scotland discussion groups, which is going to be in 3 weeks' time on the 18th of March, same time. Very short housekeeping here, the Q&A, how to use it. If you see you have a different space for the chat where we invite you to feel free to comment anything you want, have all the conversations you want without, of course, stopping paying attention. But if you want to have a chat, please use a chat there. But if you're going to be asking questions, there's that specific space where you can ask a question. And even more practically, you can upvote questions. So if you have a question and someone's already asked it, just click on it and say, yeah, this is anything for me. That's the easiest way for us to make sure that we address the most popular questions on the Q&A part of our chat. We're going to be asking you before we start a couple of questions just to have an idea of where you're at, both geographically and in your agroforestry journey. So we're going to ask you if you could get your phones, go to menti.com and use the code 6649515. That's going to take you to our space where we're going to be asking the questions. And if you're on a computer, we're going to be sharing in a second. We're going to be sharing the link to the questions that we have. If you can't access it now, don't worry. What we're going to do as well is make sure that this is asymptomatic, so you guys will be able to revisit it later on as well if you want to share later on, or for whatever reason you cannot connect now. All these questions will be available for you to answer through the coming weeks even. So let's go for the first one. It would be really interesting to see where you're based. The chat was already giving us some ideas of you being a bit all over the place, but we would like to know where you're at. And so I'm seeing that most people are in Scotland, some England, one person in Wales, someone outside the UK. If you can remember the name of the Menti code, it's up here, 6649515. Scotland still making the most of all our guests today. Mm-hmm. We'll give it a wee second more. 50 people have answered, 55. Really, it kind of explodes all of a sudden. When we get to 70, I'll move. But as 35 Scotland, 19 England, 4 outside the UK, Northern Ireland. It's great to see people from all over being part of it. Super pleased that you're here. And we were about to make it to 70. We made it to 70. So I'll move to the next question, which is all about whether you manage an agroforestry project now or not, or whether you're hoping to start, or maybe you're really interested in agroforestry, but you're not really a crofter or a farmer. This is all information that helps us understand our audience and make sure that we actually address your questions properly. So lots of hoping to start, not unlike our last time. In the previous one, we also had lots of people that were looking for the right tools to get started with their agroforestry project. So not to stress you, Roger and James and Rosa, but 56% of people here are about to hear from your wisdom. So prepare for that. And let's see, so 56% sort of about to start, 9% yes. So let's see, what are the barriers that are stopping you from implementing agroforestry in your land? That would be really interesting for us to know. Is it because of the funding? Is it because you don't really know where to start? Maybe a lack of examples that we're going to be addressed today. So hopefully this will be really important for you if you're on that side. Maybe you're worried about the impact on your operations, or you just don't have enough land to actually get started, or any other potential reason. Funding and knowing where to start seems to be one of the main things. So hopefully we're going to be able to give you at least a few clues through this webinar. Again, I'm going to wait a little bit until we get to 70 and then I'll move. So again, funding, really, really important. Knowing where to start, really important, and not enough land. Not unlike our last time. So we have an idea of where you're at. Feel free to continue this information if you want to. But now I'm actually miraculously going to shut up and let Clem take the helm and introduce our lovely, lovely guests. So off you go, Clem.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, so I'm Clem. I'm one of the other farming and land use managers at the Soil Association. And we're really delighted to be joined by Roger Howison from Parkhill Farm and James Reid and Rosa Bevan from Noth in Aberdeenshire. So we're just going to kick off the conversation and chat for about half an hour, and then we're going to open to questions from the audience. So it would be great if each of you could kind of introduce your farms to start with, and maybe a little bit about why you first planted trees, why you decided to do that. So we'll go to you, Roger, first. Do you want to share with us a bit about your farm?
Sure. Hi everybody. I'm Roger. So I'm the farmer. Well, my family and I were the farmers at Parkhill Farm, which is just outside Newborough, northeast Fife, on the River Tay. It's 537 acres, traditional mixed farm. It's about 300 acres of arable with spring barley, winter wheat, oats, and now peas and potatoes in the rotation. My wife and I, we emigrated back here from Canada about 10, 11 years ago, and to take over the farm from my father. And my wife was particularly keen on planting trees. So not long after we came back, when it was one of our children's birthdays, and rather than do a traditional goodie bag of sweeties to take away, she had got in touch with the Woodland Trust and bought about 20 baby Scots pine trees, and that's what every kid got when they left the party. And so from that point onwards, she read lots into the Woodland Trust, and we started talking to them about planting trees on the farm. And we were also looking at other crops or other things and ideas that we could diversify into, just to make it a little bit more challenging, as if it wasn't challenging already, and interesting and something exciting. So on the Woodland Trust website, my wife Rachel found a section on Stephen Briggs, who's a farmer down in Peterborough, in England, and he had planted several thousand apple trees in an alley cropped format. So we were very interested in that. Newborough, where we live, has a long history of growing apples and fruit. Tyrrhenesian monks came here in the 12th century and set up Lindores Abbey. So they introduced apple tree growing to this area. So there's still about 500 trees in the local town that are descended from the monks' apple trees. So apples, do we want an orchard? We weren't that keen on that because that was seemed like a big sort of skill set to learn. We wanted something that didn't require lots of inputs like chemicals, fertilizers, machinery. So the alley cropping format seemed quite interesting. And so we decided that we would go down to see Stephen Briggs' farm. Went down there, met Stephen, saw the alley cropping in his fields, and just thought this is fantastic. This ticks all the boxes for us. Came back, spoke to the Woodland Trust and asked if we could add 750 apple trees to the 10,000 native trees that we were going to plant around the farm, and they seemed quite agreeable to that, and we put in the application to the PUR project and were successful, and so that's why we did it.
Fantastic. 750, so many. Brilliant. James and Rosa, can you give us a little insight into your farm and why you introduced trees?
I'm muted.
Hi folks. So we're living near the village of Rhodiere, which is in Aberdeenshire in the northeast of Scotland, and we're farming on a very small scale. We have about 8 acres here, which is a family-owned piece of land, and we originally set the place up, or we moved here to be able to be able to grow as much food as we can, possibly not necessarily self-sufficient, but taking a bit more responsibility for our own needs. And so started producing vegetables for the home. But having a permaculture background, it was sort of, part of the design often looks at perennial plantings. There's quite a lot of focus on trees, so we were always sort of starting to plant trees in the background while setting up the gardens and things that would produce food for the house. I moved here in 2012, so we're getting on to 10 years here, and then Rosa and I met in 2017 and started working together, setting up the market garden, which is our main enterprise here on the farm. So we run a community-supported agriculture scheme where we've been producing veg box for 20 to 22 weeks out of the season for up to 50 families from 1/4 of an acre. So quite a small area on the 80 acres that we've got. And a lot of the rest of the acreage really is made up of small-scale silver pasture, so grazing with plantings of trees for our goats. We've got a small herd of dairy goats. We've also got a few sheep and some hens, which the eggs go into the veg boxes. So yeah, quite a lot going on.
Mention the geese.
Yeah, geese too. Yeah, but why we planted trees? Yeah, well, I guess we kind of answered that with the permaculture side of things. But we love woodland. We love trees, but we're also very, we want to farm, we want to produce food and raise livestock. So for agroforestry, for us, is that perfect balance between devoting land to sort of an ecological side of things and also be able to fuse it with the ability to be able to still, produce a yield.
Great, thanks, James. Maybe you can both actually tell us a little bit about the kinds of products and yields that you do produce. So Roger, I know in your first video, you talk a bit about your brilliant cider, apple harvest and cider production last year. Can you tell us a bit more about your aspirations and maybe how big a part of your farm business is the processing and the direct sales going to become, do you think?
Sure. Let's use the word brilliantly with caution. Until let's wait till we taste it in the spring, just hopefully. Sure. So, I mean, the overriding reason why we wanted to plant trees was for the environmental benefits to the land and in the world as a whole. So that was always the primary goal. So being able to plant trees that we could get a crop from was the secondary goal. So had we wanted to focus on yield, we would have gone down the orchard route. So in answer to the question, the apples and the yield are really a byproduct, a secondary product to the overriding goal. However, we want it to be profitable, but I mean, I don't have high ambitions for that to be profitable for a few years, and it may or may not. Whether it is profitable or not is not the ultimate goal for us. But we've gone down that road now. We didn't get enough apples from the field. I hope to one day do get a much bigger yield. In the video, we said we got to just over 200 kilos of apples. But we should, if 750 apple trees were planted in an orchard, there would be lots of tons of apples coming off that. But we'll never get that kind of yield because planted in rows, especially where we are, the wind goes right through the trees, and that's bad for yield, but it's great for keeping disease down. And so that was one of the reasons why we wanted to plant it in the rows, because we don't. There still is a little bit of disease, but we don't have to fight it as much as what it would be in an orchard. So, going back to the question, though, it is definitely part of the business plan. Now that we've made cider for the first time, ask me that again after the next harvest, and if I haven't sold all this year's cider, then it might change.
Great. Yeah, so do you guys want to talk a bit about not just fruit, but other yields and other products you might get from the agroforestry plantings you've done?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the systems that we've got here on the farm are to support the household, to support us as a family. So a lot of the sort of trees that we've been planting for firewood is to keep us warm in the future. And the fruit trees, yeah, we definitely planted a lot of fruit trees within the market garden so that we could supply fruit into the veg boxes. And those trees were planted, the market garden trees were planted in 2017. So we're starting to get quite a good crop of apples and plums, but certainly not enough to put a generous amount into people's shares.
Token amount.
A token amount, yeah. So yeah, we really see a lot of what we've got going on here as a support for us as a family. Obviously, the main income comes from the veg box, but yeah, it makes it feel very supported having these different systems around, and they all feed into each other. So it's quite difficult sometimes to fully explain everything that goes on. I mean, from the goat's point of view.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of different outputs from the tree systems, and a lot of them come from harvesting each different thing. So, you know, when we would coppice a tree, for example, and that's the, you know, for example, some willow, then that gets taken to the goats first of all, and then that will feed the goats, and then the brash from that will maybe go either into wood chip or creating a dead hedge or something. So we try and use every single part of it. Can, I guess you could say that's maybe complex if you were trying to replicate that in maybe a larger system or something, but for us that works really well. We try and like close as many loops as possible. And then obviously you get outputs from those things, so like dairy from the goats, and we can make tree hay. There's just a lot of different products aside from food and fuel from the trees.
The forage is a big one.
Yeah, we use that a lot.
Whether that's for the goats or the sheep.
Yeah, could you tell us a bit more about the kind of silver pasture systems and how you might integrate the geese or the goats in terms of grazing in the actual trees or tree lanes? How exactly do you do that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, when we moved to the property, the previous owners had already planted a lot of trees. And lucky for us, they were sort of planted around where the worst of the winds come from, so the south, southwest, west. So we started off, we had a few Shetland cows in the early days, and we started off just by grazing them under the trees because they're quite a small breed of cows, so they were able to fit under the trees and enjoy any grass that was under there or the browse from the trees. Then we started looking into ways that we could sort of utilize other parts of the farm and manage to graze animals without them necessarily always eating the trees, and utilizing some of the fields that weren't devoted to growing crops for the veg box. So we've got two areas of silver pasture. So silver pasture being the integration of trees, useful trees within grazing. One field to the west of our whole farm, and one above the market garden. So in the west we've got 6 rows of trees, which are mostly for either wood fuel or forage for the animals. And then above the market garden, it's a mixture of nut trees, but they're also on. They've been planted in the silver pasture design, so we can graze the animals between the trees. We use electric netting to be able to move the animals around without them browsing when we don't want them to, but that doesn't always work. So we sort of start with the goats. It's like a small scale leader system where the goats go into the field first and graze down the grass, and then we follow with the geese, and then even with our chickens in a mobile house, so they'll follow in after the ruminants and scratch around in the manure and spread that around for us, and hopefully breaking any pest cycles that might be building up. And we try and have a rotation so that we know how long the goats and the sheep have been on the grazing, so that we can kind of plan that to get round again and start the process all over.
Great, thanks. Maybe we can talk a bit about the design. So Roger, you talked about, obviously you're quite inspired by Stephen Briggs and the alley cropping kind of design. Can you tell us a bit more, or you can even show us if you want? Do you want to show us the aerial view so we can get a bit of a visual? I know how much you want to do this, share the screen and show us on Google Maps and tell us a bit about the spacings and that kind of thing. Or is Anna going to do that? Are you going to? Oh no, we've got it. Here we are. Brill. So I think Roger's
about the design for a little bit. So there's 750 apple trees in this field. They're in 10 rows. The rows are, each row of apple trees is in a 3 metre wide sward of grass and wildflowers. And then the rows are 27 metres apart. So from tree to tree, it's 27 metres apart. And that leaves an alley of 24 metres. And the alley is where we would have our arable crop. So in the satellite image just now that you're seeing, it's on Google Earth, so you can go and see that in your own time as well. If you just put the farm name in and the postcode, which is KY146HH, you'll be able to see the field. So the alley there, we have, it was spring barley that was growing. So we've had 2 arable crops of spring barley, and we put it into grass last year. The reason the alleys are 24 metres apart is that we're a conventional farm in that we use chemicals and fertiliser. So we needed to be able to get a sprayer down the alleys. So the sprayer boom is 24 metres wide. So that's the reason why they're spaced out like that. And then at the headlands as well, we needed to be able, so at the end of each row to the edge of the field, we needed there to be 24 metres as well, so that the sprayer could get round the end rig. I must tell you, for all those that are thinking of doing this, it was a very stressful time when the seed drill went down that first alley for the first time planting barley, because that was when I truly discovered whether I had each row the right width apart. And sadly, that first alley, it went a little bit diagonal at the end. So rather, the drill was, it's a 3 metre wide drill. So rather than get up there 8 clean times, it had to go up about 8 3/4. So after that, I was quite devastated, but thankfully all the other alleys were exactly 24 metres. But it took a lot of walking and a lot of measuring tape and wire and rope to get those rows of trees bang on. And you can't really tell from the satellite image there, but the field is really undulating. It's if you zoom out a little bit, Anna, you can maybe see this is where a big an ice sheet retreated. So the field is very sandy and gravelly, and it's full of these big mounds, which are basically the remains of moranic mounds left from the retreating ice sheet. Another thing with the design of the field. So in the past, we'd always cultivated it up and down the way, so up the slope and down the slope, which was essentially east to west, and that's a natural way to plough or cultivate a field like that. But one of the first things that we learned was with the apple trees planting in rows, we had to plant them north to south, which was right across the field, so following the contour. So this made it even more challenging trying to lay these rows out, because the field was going like that, and it's hard to tell if the rows were directly parallel with each other. And the reason for having them north to south, the apple trees, is that so they get full sun on both sides of it. If they had been in a east-west format, so up and down the hill, there would have been shading on one side of the apple trees. So yeah, that's a brief outline of the design.
Great, thanks, Roger. Yeah, could you tell me a bit about some of the varieties of trees, maybe, James and Rosa, or also about the nitrogen fixing trees that you're integrating as well? That would be quite interesting as part of understanding the design.
Okay. Yeah, well, in the market garden with the fruit tree rows that we've put in, it's nothing too exotic. It's apples and pears. No, sorry, apples and plums. We do have some pears, but they haven't done very well.
Yeah.
Apples and plums, varieties that are going to be able to sort of withstand our quite high elevation. We're at 270 meters above sea level. We're on a south-facing slope, so that works to our advantage really well. Yeah, and nitrogen fixers. I mean, we've got in the tree rows themselves in the market garden, we've got autumn olive, which isn't a very common tree or shrub, but it fixes atmospheric nitrogen. It also produces an edible berry. We cut it a lot for feeding to the goats. So it's we use that as a nurse crop really to provide a sort of adequate fertility for the trees. We do have some black locust, which is a nitrogen fixing tree, which originates from the Appalachian mountain range in North America, which is more being grown in the silver pasture systems as a fuel wood species. Sea buckthorn as hedging along some of our kind of boundaries. We do have some Siberian pea shrub, but they're just smaller trees that we've got in smaller areas of forest garden rather than in the market garden. What else have we got going on?
You said cereals, because that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, of course.
The new orchard area.
Yeah, alder, good old common alder. We've got a lot of that in the wet areas around the farm where we're doing coppice. So we've got some areas of wood fuel coppice dedicated to trying to bring in wood fuel for the future. So we're mostly just focusing on that. Hybrid poplar is a one that we're really enjoying growing. Willow, but again, as well as the native willows that were already on the farm, we're planting a lot of hybrid willow, which are very fast growing, will grow 6 foot per year. So we've been planting them since 2013, coppicing them, or cutting them at least every year or so, and propagating them and just putting in more hedgerows around the place. That's kind of how we got started really. The first plantings were focusing on putting in hedgerows to buffer the wind that we get here. We've got a lot of different species.
Yeah, and what's the orientation of your... Oh, are you going to show images? Yeah, go for it. What's the orientation of your rows in the market garden, and how did you sort of make decisions around?
Yeah, so actually in the market garden, they're going east to west across slope. I wouldn't say they're bang on contour. Okay, this is an aerial photo that I took in autumn last year, and you can see the market garden is to the east. So the right side of the photograph, you can see our one large polytunnel and all the vegetable beds, and you can just make up at least 2 of the tree rows, which
kind of bushy bits in between the veg beds.
We've got 4 in total, but the 2 that are in the middle there are the most established. So yeah, they're going across the slope. We kind of were following the orientation of the veg beds, which they basically were working with the size of the field that we had to work with. But also we prefer walking across slope than walking up and down. And when you're working in a market garden, you're pushing heavy wheelbarrows of manure around the place, or baskets of carrots and things. And for us, we just prefer walking across the slope. It's much easier than going up and down. There is, of course, other good reasons for that, with things like the trees being roughly on contour, helping to stop any runoff or soil loss or nutrient loss from up above. But we had to make sure that we didn't cause too much of a hedgerow with our plantings because of the vegetables that were to the north of the tree rows. So the fruit trees themselves are quite widely spaced at about 4 meters between each apple or plum. But between the apples and plums, we've got this nitrogen fixing shrub, the Aleagnus or autumn olive. And we've purposely kept the apples, we're not planting apples too close to each other. We're separating them with different species to avoid any pest builds up with those associated plants. And of course, again, the forest garden tree rows themselves are very diverse. With comfrey, and we've got black currants and raspberries. The rows are 30 meters long, by about 3 meters wide. So within each row, we've got 30 meters of top and soft fruit, and then a lot of comfrey, which we harvest for all the animals that we keep.
And it's a great mulch as well. It just kind of self-mulches in the tree row. And feeds the garden plants. Yeah, it's amazing. It's great.
Do you guys want me to show the infography?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
stick them up. Yeah. So we've got a couple of designs which we put together just quite recently. So yeah, this is this is actually to the north of our house, up above our goat shed or our byre, and this was a system that we made really for feeding or producing tree hay or forage for the animals. So the poplars that were in the design already, they were planted by the previous owners, and we had to do a lot of thinning out and redesigning of a lot of the woodland that we've got here to make it work for us. They were all quite closely planted, and it was difficult for us to sort of get around the trees, and we wanted to make it work for the needs of our smallholding. So we found that the geese work really well in these closely spaced small silver pasture systems, or in some of the coppice areas that we've put in. The geese are great for putting in amongst the coppice because they keep the grass down. They're not going to damage the trees like the sheep or the goats certainly would, although we've seen a bit of damage from the geese.
Interesting.
Yeah, when the geese haven't got adequate grazing, or like when there's been snow on the ground, as we have had recently, they will start to debark some of the younger trees, just like sheep or goats would. But we're working on that area right now. We're thinning more trees out and getting ready to plant about 20 mixed fruit trees at the top of that design. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Well, we're getting quite a lot of questions into the Q&A box, so I want to move to audience questions really soon. But just the one thing I sort of wanted to touch on was just how possible do you think it is to scale up the kind of work you're doing at Noth, and what Roger, and I'd like to see what Roger's reflections on it are as well, like the sort of integrating more varieties of trees, or can you, it seems like you can scale down alley cropping to quite a small scale and do it also large scale, but some of that more diverse mixtures of trees and bushes and things, how possible, you're obviously working on a very small scale with a very human scale, how can you see that being scaled up?
I think so, but the diversity could be troublesome.
Yeah.
In fact, we've scaled down in diversity at times. It's very tempting to, when you see the sort of connection between all these elements, it's very easy to try and pull everything out of the bag and see how much you can get from your piece of land. But we've already learned that it's best at times to kind of keep a lid on that sometimes. But certainly the mixture of apples or plums, the top fruit with a shrub layer below, I think could definitely be done on a larger scale, and some associated sort of herbaceous plantings below that. But yeah, if you're looking like at Roger's scale of thinking about putting in different herbs and things to bring in the beneficial insects, it might be easier to obviously do a seeding mix. Yeah. Which I think you've done, Roger, haven't you? You've got flowers and different grasses and things along with your tree rows.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on it, Roger? Yeah, you've obviously got a diverse seed mix and flowers in your sward. Are there any reflections on some of the things that Noth are doing that you think you could integrate into your tree line?
Oh yes, So I'm very keen to go up and visit the Noth. I've not been there, but it just looks like such a lovely, almost like a sanctuary place to visit. To really, and I need that. No, I don't know. And then to see that, to really get a better understanding of it. That graphic that you put up there was brilliant. That was really cool to see how you've done that. And I mean, we're looking at other things to plant around the apple fields, primarily for to give it a bit more shelter, but also something that bears fruit. So we also have a lot of blackthorn that's been grown on the farm for I don't know, for as long as I've been around anyway, and there's a great harvest of sloes off that we get every year. So having something like that around the field, because it's a really thick, dense hedgerow too, and it might not get tall enough. Not sure. Just going back to you talked about scaling up or scaling down. So we've we have the fields next door earmarked for doing more alley cropping, but we'll only do that once after we've got a couple more years under our belt to see what the yields are going to be like, to see if which apples are going to fare the best. And it looks like this year, surprisingly, it's the cider apples that have done the best out of the trees that we planted, not the Scottish ones. So it was the Black Dabinet or Black Dabiney cider apple that we got the most apples from. So if that cider apple is going to give us the best yield, then I would definitely be looking to create another field with this alley cropping format, because just to be able to get that cider apple planted in a way that requires low inputs and that we can still get an arable crop from the field it's so satisfying. But I mean, we lost 7% of I'm not going to say lose is the wrong word to say. We gave 7% of that arable field to the apple trees. So that's we'll be getting hopefully we'll get some sort of crop and along with the environmental benefits from 7% of that arable field. So for the next 40 years, as long as the apple trees are alive. So, yeah.
And do you think that if you were to see it as a 7% loss, have you gained, never mind the environmental benefits, will the profits from the apples or the cider in future, you think, counterbalance that loss of productive land? Well,
I pay myself 50 pence an hour, so yes. If we don't factor in all the time that went in the first place planting it, I should do. I think eventually it will. If the yield, the trees are still young, they're just 3 to 4 years old, so we should be getting more yield off it. And if we can make a batch of cider every year and sell it at a profit, then yes, that will make it financially worthwhile. But environmentally, it was worthwhile as soon as the first tree went into the ground.
Brilliant. And just lastly, if you had any top tips or real lessons learned, any of you, from what you've been doing with trees, like to do with planting or establishment or choice of species, or what would be your I wish I'd done that differently bit of advice to other people?
Don't plant raspberries next to your market garden beds.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why?
Oh, they like to spread.
Oh.
Yeah, that's something we've noticed. So we put, like I said, we put in 30 meters of raspberries on the south side of these east to west, almost on contour strips. And yeah, they're definitely starting to spread quite well into the nice soil of our vegetable beds. So we're having to hand pull them out, which is great. I mean, they get fed to the goats, so we're potting them up and putting them around the farm. But I don't think we would worry if it wasn't next to the market garden. I think in a field situation, they would get grazed down by our choice of livestock anyway. So yeah, to watch out for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, you were saying about kind of, as a top tip to kind of plant as much kind of windbreak as possible. If you're in a windy spot, but if you're thinking about establishing kind of trees on your farm, well, actually to start off with chucking some willow in the ground, create a kind of good windbreak and create those microclimates.
Yeah, start on sort of the edges of your property, whether that's to show where your boundary is or to work with the wind, because you can then treat those as nurseries. So we quite often start black currants. If we're taking our own cuttings, we'll put them into a hedge and put them at very close spacing. And for the first few years, as they're growing on, they're kind of acting as quite a good windbreak, especially when you've got something taller behind them. And then you can thin them out and move them around the farm. So looking at windbreaks as nurseries as windbreaks. But starting with that, so that you're creating the microclimate for the trees, like the fruit trees and things that might need more protection. Yeah.
Yeah,
what about you?
Yeah, the same, almost the same. The biggest. I mean, we were we knew Scotland's a windy country, and we'd heard that the apple trees can suffer from exposure, and a lot of them have suffered from exposure. So when we've lost a lot of blossom last spring because of the wind going through the alleys, and planting them in alleys was one of the reasons, was because we wanted the wind going through them, so that would help keep the disease down. But it's been counterproductive. So with hindsight, I don't know if I would have used that field. There's a flatter field just next to it that has it's beside a burn, so it has an old line of trees there. So it is more sheltered. But it was a flat field, and it's a good arable field, so that's why we didn't go there. This corner field was not such a great arable field, lighter soil. So if we're taking quite a big risk here, that's why we'll do it in this lesser productive field. And so just going back to what James was saying there too, that I think that it would have been a sensible idea for me to plant some plant some single rows of apple trees in different parts of the farm, just to see how they fared, and then I maybe would have learned a bit more about how bad the exposure could be for them. But it's too late now.
Just a large scale experiment.
Yeah.
We started off by trialing the fruit trees in different parts, like with the smaller areas of forest garden or mixed orchards, whatever you want to call them. But that was a good way of doing it. The other thing I just thought of was also especially on our scale, and if you're sort of wanting to do mixed plantings of fruit trees, I think it's quite tempting to overstock an area with trees or plant them too close together. And definitely putting them at wider spacings, even though it might look a bit sparse in the first few years, they really do take off and fill up the room. Because I think the amount of light that we don't get in our climate, I think they really need that space for that. And the kind of concept of a forest garden, it's more a perpetually young system that we're trying to emulate with things like that for the light. So yeah, and trees are expensive, so you don't want to buy too many.
No, and when for all the doubts the many doubts that we had when we were planning out our system, at the end of the day, trees are hardy, and the trees, they will grow whether the wind goes through them and we lose some of the blossoms. The trees are hardy, and then if you just leave them alone, they're going to grow. You don't have to do anything to them. So that was just when I came right down to it. Right. That's fine.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, I think we've got loads of questions. So, Anna, do you want to fire some questions to these guys?
Yeah, there's millions of questions. So we're going to get started. And again, we're going to follow start with the most upvoted, and then we'll see how we move. Really shortly before we start, everybody commenting on the chat. I see that the chat is really alive and full of things. We can't really share any personal information. So if you guys want to contact each other, either let us know specifically that you're okay with being contacted, or share it in the chat. I thought I would say that because last time I forgot, and it might be a really good opportunity for you guys to connect with people that are close by. I've seen a couple of the comments there. So just to let you know. We're going to start with the first questions. You ready, guys? You don't seem that ready. Come on.
Yeah.
We're going to start with the most upvoted question. I think that it's probably for James and Rosa, and it's if you have any advice on how to turn pasture to silvopasture without young trees being eaten by animals, be it goats or geese. How did you manage it at the very beginning?
We planned it around our electric netting. Basically, we knew that we'd have to obviously use fencing, so we designed the cell size. Well, we designed the linear plantings with a gap in between that kind of matched up with where the corners were on our electric fencing that we had, and obviously taking into account the kind of size of the grazing cell for what animals we did have. Yeah, I mean, we just have to make sure the fences are really hot. Don't put it too temptingly close to the trees because they will try and lean over.
Yeah, I mean, the space are the tree plantings in the silver pasture in our west field, which do run north to south, because we're actually the wind was coming. We didn't want to create wind tunnels, so we've put them north to south, down up and down the field. They've got there's about 12 meters between each row of tree from the center, but it's about 8 meters for the electric netting.
Yeah.
So there's an 8 meter wide grazing strip. I think we would actually make them a bit wider in the future. You can already see that the trees are starting to sort of, what they'll look like once they start maturing or mature.
Yeah, because you planted this one strip of willow quite a few years ago, and that's quite mature, bushed out quite a lot. It takes up quite a lot of space. So take into account how much space the trees will need.
But yeah, fencing, electric netting is fantastic. I mean, say that it's a bit annoying to roll up in the roof all the time, but it's definitely better than for putting in permanent fencing straight away. We wouldn't have done permanent fencing straight away. Definitely, the electric netting allows you to see where you actually go, what you're going to use, which field works, and then potentially you could put in permanent fencing at that point.
But the benefit of electric netting in that system is that, when you don't have it there, you have all the space you need to tend to the trees. If you want to be coppicing those trees and taking a lot of material away, if there was a fence and quite a slim corridor, even if it was space for the trees to grow, it's still going to be quite difficult to access. So having that, flexibility that you get with electric netting is really useful.
We herd the goats around the farm, our little herds, so we do take them out of these grazing cells, and we take them around the forestry that was on that aerial view, and we're with them. So we just watch them and move with them, and if they're eating something that too much, we will move them on, but we want them to browse as much variation as possible.
Yeah.
And did you guard your young trees as well?
Yeah, just we get the occasional Rhodiere coming in. So if a goat escapes, then they've got guards on them anyway. But sometimes that doesn't stop them.
The top can get nipped off still, which has happened, unfortunately. The healthiest, best ones that are just gloriously poking through the top. So there's been some casualties, but really not much.
Yeah. But the geese are proving really great if you're thinking about smaller livestock or large poultry. The geese are very easy to herd around into the different grazing cells, or like I said before, for where your plantings are just too dense for sheep or goats or cows, then goose is like the cow of the poultry world.
Yeah, they're brilliant. Yeah.
How about you, Roger? Have you had any troubles with animals browsing on your lovely, lovely trees? And what have you done to avoid it?
Yes, Rhodiere have been a big problem. They seem to have multiplied in numbers now that we've planted all these apple trees here. So Rhodiere and voles and field mice have been are an issue. So we at the start of the project, Rhodiere have been on the farm for a long time. They're in the area, so we knew that they were going to be a threat, as are rabbits and hares. So we sort of priced up a deer fence initially, but it was just too expensive to put that around a 16-acre field. So then we looked at various different ways to guard each individual tree. And it's still very expensive when you get those plastic tubes on every single tree. So then we opted, and then it had to be a tube that was good for the apple tree, let the air in, and also a tube that we could take off to prune. And so it was difficult coming up with a system, and we did. So we ended up with buying a roll of sort of like a hard plastic mesh, and then we cut the tree tubes ourselves and then tied them together with cable ties. And I think the first 100 trees we messed up though, because we put the stake in beside the tree, and then we put the tube over the tree and stapled it tied it to the stake. and that meant that we couldn't get the tube off to then prune the apple trees. So then we came up with another system with the stake, and the tube was bigger, and it went over the stake and the tree. So we used more mesh, so it was a little bit more expensive, but we're then able to take the tube off to get into the tree. But it's the male Rhodiere, the bucks that we think are, we're pretty sure that are the main problem. So they're not actually eating the bark. They're coming with their antlers. I've not seen them do it. And some part of me's not quite 100% sure if it is the Rhodiere, but I should have a picture, but the bark gets just stripped off in little thin strips. But some of the score marks are like a fine tooth. So, and I'm not sure if that comes from the deer. And somebody said, oh, it's maybe a hair that's getting up. But when we put the tree guards on, we've gone to the field in the morning in the first season, and some of the tree guards were right up and off the stake, and the deer were actually getting their antlers in and lifting it up. So I don't think a hare could go in and lift the tree guard up. So then we went round every single tree with a staple gun, 750, and stapled the tree guard to the stake. One staple, and the deer were still able to get under the tree guard and lift it up and rip the staple off. So then we 3-stapled it. They aren't able to get the tree guard off now, but it makes it a complete pain if we have to do any low pruning. So hopefully this first few years of pruning is a lot more, and now hopefully there'll be no branches underneath the tree guard, and they're all above it. So, and the other, the rodents. So is it the year before last? So I topped the wildflower mix. I topped that in usually about September, once all the flowers or their seeds have dropped, so hopefully that they reseed again. And it was 2 seasons ago. I was late getting in with the mower. I think it was November or December when I eventually got in. By that point, the voles and field mice had made these lovely little nests in all this long dead grass under each tree, and they were so the bottom was all nibbled away, the first sort of 6 inches of it, not on all the trees, but on a lot of trees. But then in the spring, the kestrels came back. So we haven't seen kestrels around here for as long as I've been back, for 10 years. And I remember seeing them as a kid. And when we were going around doing maintenance last spring, there was lots of these little pellets, which I didn't realize. I thought it was just owls that left pellets of what they had eaten, but there was lots of little bones in them. And then I read up that it was kestrels because they don't really digest it fully. So we're finding all these little pellets beside these little vole holes, and we thought, oh, this is wonderful, good. But yeah, Rhodiere have been the biggest problem for us with the apple trees.
We have problems.
I love to see James' face with talking about voles. Your face was like, I feel your pain.
Voles for us, I think that's the thing. There will have been a lot of voles in the field before we turned it into a market garden, because where our market garden was just a very rough field with years and years of grass and dieback and growth. And now we've got these really lovely, diverse, multi-layered tree rows. And of course, they're a great place for the voles to live.
Yeah, they go for the vegetables. They love the kind of beautiful, perfect beetroot. They'll just come out, little nibble, go back in again. So it's that perfect.
Always the night before harvest.
Yeah. When they're at their prime.
We've seen a lot of weasels, which is great. So looking at, again, trying to encourage more habitat for predators of the voles, but one thing that we have to put up with.
We did talk about maybe if we redesigned it and there was a bit more space, we would have maybe created a bit more of a larger pathway between where the tree row is and the market garden beds. So there was a bit more of a kind of dangerous journey for the voles to go on before they got to the vegetables.
And I don't know if we've got time. Can you put up the other slide that we sent you? They're both blue, so you have to see if it's the right one. But that
let me see.
That shows.
There we go. The alley cropping, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That shows the proximity of the market garden bed to the tree rows that we've been talking about all this time.
It should be up any minute now. It's sort
Okay.
of like a bit slow. That's fine.
But yeah, I don't know if anyone's got any tips out there for vole control.
Yeah. I guess people are talking about kind of wrap their boxes and things like this, which is quite interesting.
Have you, James, Rosa, have you got a dog?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, young one.
What kind of dog have you got?
He's a collie.
A collie, because we've got a working cocker, but I say working in inverted commas. She's a pet, but I mean she is a great vole catcher. And I've seen other little Jack Russells that walks the fields and grass now, so we get a lot of people walking their dogs through it, which is fine until the hay starts growing. But yeah, the terriers and the spaniels go nuts around the apple trees now, trying to sniff because they can smell the voles, and yeah, they do catch them. Yeah,
we had an older collie dog that used to do that.
That's right.
Yeah,
Cat does pretty well as well. But yeah, sometimes we find the cat catching the weasels. And that's
really?
So you want to catch the thing that we don't want. But anyway.
Yeah, God, that sounds like that could be a vicious fight, a cat and a weasel, wouldn't it? Yeah. Oh, did the cat win?
Yeah.
He did.
I'm going to ask the next question. It's a little bit around following on the same topic, but it's about how is it having animals underneath trees, but trees that are already adults? Can you do that? Is there anything that you have to be careful with, or once they're already grown and fine, you can just continue, just let your animals loose underneath them once they're actually working?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, obviously we've experienced that, like I said earlier, with the cattle. I'm sure it's, everyone has a different story to tell about their livestock, and my sheep don't eat trees and his sheep does, or whatever. But we found that the cows will obviously browse on the trees, but they didn't debark the trees. The goats will debark, the Shetland sheep will debark. Again, it depends on what they've got accessible.
It depends on how much time they're spending there as well.
Yeah, but I think you can definitely move animals quite quickly through established, mature woodland, or keep them under it. But I think, obviously, as I'm sure everyone knows, it just comes down to the management and watching the animal and getting to know their behaviour. To see how they're going to react to the trees, and whether they're going to just take them all out.
We have two old strips of trees on the farm. I mean, they're about 100 years old, which have been thinned out over the years, and I mean they're now classed as woodland grazing. So it's mainly Scots pine, larch, and there's some sycamore in there. And I mean, we don't do anything to it at all. So I take the odd bit of dead larch out now and again, but there's a lot of deadfall on the ground. And I'm personally not a livestock farmer, but we let the grazing out up there to livestock, and I see the cows and the sheep in there, and you can see the evidence of it, and they definitely like it in there. So and when I say we don't, there's no management goes into it. Maybe before my time, even before my father's time, was the last time it was thinned out, and that would have been the last proper management to it. And it's part of that programme with the Woodland Trust, where we're planting 10,000 native trees around the farm, linking up all our pockets of trees, so right down from River Tay up to and across the top. But we've planted them, they're all spaced out 3 to 4 metres, some more than that, and they're all fenced off from grazing fields at the moment, but the long-term plan for that is to be able to open the gates up and let the livestock back in there and graze amongst the trees, with hopefully minimal management.
It's been great with the weather that we've had recently with the snow. We've had the most snow that we've ever seen in the last 10 years living here, really, and it was fantastic having a small area of we've got some Sitka spruce, which I think was like remnants of an old plantation, and we put the sheep up in that field, and they'll just naturally go and find places to shelter from the snow, and it really helps. so much with giving them a better quality of life through the worst weather.
That's nice. That's great. Clem, I'm going to pass to you if you can, because for some reason I'm not being able to see the questions. So I just make the most of having it as co-host and ask you to follow up with the next question.
Did Clem have a wardrobe change?
She did. Yeah. She did. While we were talking about geese.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. We're having technological problems. This is a question for James and Rosa. Is the income from your plot sufficient to provide a living, or does it need to be supplemented by other income? I hope that's not too personal a question, but it's a lot of people would like to know that. So a bit of a question around
it's a really great
profitability.
question, one that doesn't get talked about enough, I think. So for us, the market, well, let me start with, like, we live a cheap life. We're very, very lucky that we don't have to pay a mortgage, so that makes it very different for us in some respects. Market garden pays for our bills, our living, but when the car breaks down, then we're a little bit more stuck.
Any kind of, we're not really able to make enough to save much, other than like kind of a couple of things that we can spend on per year. But if we wanted to make a large investment in the farm, that's pretty tough from what we're earning. So
but I think it's certainly something that could be upscaled. I mean, this isn't a conversation about market gardening or CSAs, but from the fact that we're managing to do that for a quarter of an acre, 50 veg boxes per week, and you can obviously work out that if you scale that up, even just buy another 50 veg boxes, then we would start to make certainly more of an income from that. And we're living in an area that's not, we're an hour from Aberdeen city, so we're very rural, so it can be troublesome sometimes to sell that veg. But we do have other forms of income coming in, which but smaller than the vegetable income, from a little bit of consultancy, our YouTube videos, they're generating money. We're looking at accommodation. We've run permaculture design courses in the past. We do tours in season, so we charge tours. So we're definitely not just living off of the market garden, but it really is our biggest income at the moment.
Great. Thanks for your candid response. So there's another question about, is there any kind of database that helps to decide which trees might be most suitable for the type of soil, or which trees would be most productive? Do we know of anything that you used in terms of your selection of trees, either Roger or James?
Mark Crawford's Agroforestry Research Trust has been a great one for us, from his writings down to his nursery and the website that's available.
When it came to choosing the apple tree varieties, we used a local apple tree nursery, the Apple Tree Man, who was involved with the Woodland Trust, Andrew Lear. So he helped us with choose the Scottish varieties, and then all the cider apples we used. It was a nursery down in England, Adam's Apple, and we needed varieties that they thought would work up here. So there was quite a big conversation with them, but it was quite a big leap of faith, though. And then with the native trees that we're planting, the Woodland Trust have been helping us with that plan.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of support that the Woodland Trust and Scottish Forestry can provide in terms of selection of species or advice around that for your climate and region. It's also worth pointing out, I think, that there's a really good database on tree fodder trees and selection for that. It's a European database. I'll need to find the link and share it, but Lynn Brettcroft have used that in some of their selection, and Lindsay Wistance at the Organic Research Centre has done some work on it as well, looking at palatability of different species for livestock. And and the nutritional benefits and sort of mineral content and things like that. So if you're looking to integrate trees with livestock systems, there's some quite good data, European data on that. So we'll make sure we find the link for that and share that.
Maybe Lynn, who's mysteriously in the back, has some information, but I can't seem to be able to unmute her. Lynn, could you unmute yourself? The voice from beyond is not unmuting herself. Well, eventually it'll happen and she'll be able to share more information about it. Clem, let's go to the next question, and when Lynn doesn't mute herself, we can just circle back to that.
Sorry, I can't manage to unmute myself and read questions at the same time. The multitasking is going to kill me. Right. Roger, a question for Roger. Were there any issues with establishment of the trees, specifically in relation to the grass and pollinator swards below? So how did that cause issues with the growth of the trees, or which order did you do that in?
The wrong way. We planted the apple trees. It was a ploughed field, and the plan was to plant the swords first in September, and then plant the apple trees in it. But it just didn't happen that way. So the apple trees went in first, and then the barley went into the alleys, and then we had to plant these 3-metre wide rows of grass and wildflower between the barley and around the apple trees. So that was quite challenging, but we got this really cool machine from a local contractor. It's a grass seeder that you stand behind. It's self-driven, a little hopper on it, and that it kind of plants it, tills it, plants it, and then rolls it behind. So that worked out very well. We did have issues with establishment of the apple trees, some of them, and it's hard to say at the time whether it was what all reasons affected it, whether it was the barley or the grass sword. But it was a particularly dry spring that'd be 2017. Yeah, 2017. It was a very, very dry spring, same as last spring too. Two very, very dry springs. And when you've got new trees in the ground, they need moisture, and it's a sandy field that they're in. So they didn't fare very well, some of the rows further up on the steeper slope. So we had to strap IBCs to the back of an old Fergie trailer and water the trees, which was quite challenging. But the dry spring's probably the biggest thing that hindered the growth. Now that the grass has overtaken the wild flowers, that may be competing with the apple trees. We did dig quite a bit of turf out last spring around the apple trees to try and give them a better chance, and then we put horse dung and hen pen down on some of them, and that kind of acted a bit like a mulch as well. You put wood chips down around some of the trees as well, to try and give them a better chance from the grass which has taken over.
Great. There's a question here for Rosa and James about the species of nut trees that you have in the farm, and any particular challenges or benefits that you're seeing by having them.
Nut trees. Again, we've gone quite simple, so sticking with hazel. Most of the trees are hazelnuts. So some of them are from the previous owners' plantings, which are bearing nuts, which is great. And then we've planted a lot more, again, because of more from the coppicing and wood fuel point of view of a relatively fast-growing tree, rather than going for the nut. We've planted chestnut. Again, more with the idea that it's a nice wood, rather than hoping to get any chestnuts. I think that's it. I mean, we're looking at some hybrid walnut, chestnuts that we might experiment with. We keep it quite simple, because I don't think, where we are and the altitude and things, I'm not sure how well we would get walnuts and chestnuts and things like that. But as a fast-growing tree, I think as a coppice for wood fuel and craft things, that's definitely worth planting.
And do you have currants planted as an understory? There's somebody wondering about that. You've talked about raspberries, but
yeah, we've got a lot of black currants,
currants.
again, because there was a patch here when we moved in, and we've just been propagating them over the years. So
They do so well.
yeah, they're great. So yeah, currants obviously in Scotland are fantastic, and so black currants along the north side, on the shadier sides of the tree rows, and then yeah, pretty much dotted around under any more sprawling forest garden designs. Because obviously these linear plantings, you know, we were planting in the market garden were to make harvesting a lot easier for us, rather than some areas of the farm where we've made it look a lot more like a forest sort of ecosystem there. So currants again, yeah, gooseberries, black currants, the old-fashioned ones. We've planted honeyberry, and we've planted aronia berry and Saskatoon, and a lot of different berries from all the cold parts of the world, and some of them are doing great. But for us and the kind of needs of producing like berries for the household and doing punnets, we've been putting black currants into the veg boxes by the punnet, which is a lot of work, picking all of the berries. So, but yeah, no, sticking with the old varieties and experimenting with some exotics for fun.
Clem, go ahead. I think that we have probably one more question in us. So choose wisely, not to put pressure on you.
Well, there's a lot of different questions. There's questions around, I think you've already answered this, Roger, but just about grass in the rotation and how you might utilise this within your arable rotation. Are you doing that?
Yeah, so actually this is quite a good point, because having the alleys, the arable alleys on a north-south aspect, which is across the hill, a problem that we quickly encountered was that when you plough a field across the hill, it turns the soil over, and it's hard to plough in the opposite direction, trying to turn it up the hill. But I've been quite interested in minimum till and no-till farming. So after 2 arable crops, we decided that we would put it to grass, because we could do that with a min-till format. And we weren't quite ready to try planting barley with min-till. So that was really the main reason why we put it to grass. But it's been quite satisfying growing that crop of grass and getting that great crop of hay off it last year. So we are looking at putting another block of grass throughout the whole arable rotation to put it around the farm.
Clem, one last probably for James and Rosa. I feel horrible sort of like being like, Clem, find one. I'm sorry. I can't see the questions on my side.
Can you talk about any trees that have been particularly for soil health or for that symbiotic relationship and encouraging mycorrhizal fungi and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've just purchased a microscope so that we can start actually looking at our soil in depth and seeing what is going on there, to see how things are getting affected and whether any compost we're buying in, how alive that actually is. I think it's really important to do that. But we can only really go on how well the fruit trees have been growing with the interplanting of species like the autumn olive, Aleagnes umbellata. I mean, I feel the trees have grown very well. They're very tall for coming on to 4 years old now, and also producing a lot of fruit. The soil around the forest garden tree rows, for example, is fantastic soil, but I think that also comes into the mulching. I mean, we was listening to Roger about trying to compete or deal with competition of grass. We planted our trees straight into pasture that we had grazed down with our cows, and then we mulched around them this kind of 3 meter by 30 meter long strip with old hessian that we had and cardboard, and then a very thick layer of wood chip. So, and we've purposely left, decaying branches and piles of wood and things around these plantings that don't get in our way. And I think that is all contributing and helping the soil life and the quality of the soil. But yeah, without having microscopic eyes, I can't really tell, 100% what's going on.
Yeah, we have nothing to compare it with because obviously the tree rows all have the nitrogen fixing plants. So
yeah, did you inoculate them when you put them in with any
we
mycorrhizal fungi?
Yeah. I can't remember what we used or who made that one, but we've been trying a few different inoculants over the years, which we thought was quite important to do. I'm not sure again how the soil is going in the field where we've done the wider spacing silver pasture with the wood fuel species, and some of those being nitrogen fixing like the black locust and the alder.
What would you inoculate the trees with? I've only heard that done with truffles.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know if is better at explaining that.
Yeah, I've done that before with it's an inoculant you get that's a whole mixture of different fungi, and it's like particularly mycorrhizal fungi to try and establish trees, particularly if it's into grassland, so where there'll be a bacterial dominance in the soil rather than a fungal dominance. So what you're trying to do is introduce the fungi that you would have in a woodland setting naturally, but that you don't have quite as much of maybe in a grassland or an arable field. So in all the orchard planting I've done, we've always inoculated the trees, and there's different places you can get stuff that does
really
that.
Interesting.
And you put it's like a powdery stuff you sprinkle around the roots when you plant the trees, and it's just supposed to, I've never done a comparative trial though to see the ones with it, the ones without it, does it make any difference? But wood chip mulch has been my mainstay for tree planting, is trying to get that fungal dominance and
the food for the fungi, and putting it around. I mean, I think that's where we were going with the application of wood chip and trying to encourage that fungal dominant soil, as you say, around where we actually need it within a field. It's Chaos fungorum is one that we've been using, which I love the name of that one. An inoculant, which I think has got biochar in it as well. That's one I remember.
What was it called? Chaos fungorum.
Yeah, I think I'm getting that right.
Yeah. So Matt in the comments is saying just local woodland leaf litter can be just as good, if not better. So it depends. I mean, you maybe don't need to ever buy anything, but we did it as an experiment to see if it would improve in really poor soil to get started. But we've lost Anna, poor Anna. She's been thrown off the call, so I'm solo, flying solo. So I'm just going to keep asking questions. I think she had a couple of things she wanted to do at the end, but I don't have the links. So I'm just going to keep going for another 5 minutes. So there was a question about maintaining trees, and I know that Roger, you said they're easy, low input, but are you doing any pruning of your trees? And the same for James and Rosa. How are you doing maintenance?
So pruning is very important with the apple trees, especially in this alley crop format, because we don't want them getting too big and then creating too much shade over the arable alleys. So the first 2-3, even this year, we're still pruning them quite heavily, and initially that was to encourage root growth, and now we're working on trying to create a nice goblet type shape that the air will still get through, but creating a thick leader branch on it so that it can handle the apple trees. And the first year it was stressful. We did a workshop and we read books and we spoke to people, and different ways of doing it, and you must do it like this. No, I don't know if I'm doing this right 750 times. What if I get this wrong? And it seemed to be okay. And even now doing it this year, I'm still like, is this the right way? Am I cutting it? No, but we went through. A local chap came and helped, and I mean, it took us maybe 3 days, the three of us, to go through the 750 trees, and it's quite a lovely experience and a nice sunny winter's day to do it.
What about yourselves, pruning
Yeah, we were
wise, James and Rosa?
prune the trees. Yeah, definitely prune them to try and keep them to harvesting height, and also to not, like I was saying, not to create too much of a dense hedgerow, considering we've got the vegetables on either side of them. But yeah, we're not trained at all or knowledgeable in fruit tree pruning. Is definitely my most nerve-wracking part of looking after those trees. Yeah, no, we're reading a lot of books too and a lot of YouTube videos, but it seems we haven't killed anything yet, anyway.
Brill. So unfortunately we've got Lynn White from Scottish Forestry who's trying to get on and speak to us about funding, but I am not able to unmute her and let her into the room. I don't know how to do it, and I'm not the host of the meeting, so I'm not sure what I can do. But we're coming just to the end now. I just want to say, yeah, thanks so much for all your insights and also for all the amazing chat that's been going on and lots of links being shared. So this will actually remain the chat bar, so you can come back and look at links and things like that. And unfortunately, I don't know how to invite Lynn in, but we'll send out her contact details and links. Oh, Anna's back. Oh my goodness.
That was nerve-wracking, but
having technological failures. Are you able to bring Lynn in for the end?
I am able to bring in.
Oh, saving the day.
Yay! After creating a lot of unnecessary drama. Yes. Lynn, you should be able to talk now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. I'll be very brief, and thanks for the opportunity. It's been great listening to catching up with Roger and that, and hearing what Rosa and that are up to. Wonderful. Just a quick thing. Obviously, I work for Scottish Forestry now. We've got lots of options, grants, and everything like that. Anna's going to send you the links to the forestry grant schemes and everything that are available. What I would say is, if you're looking at any kind of proposals or anything like that, early on, speak to your local office and they can give you a bit of guidance there for that. Also, another thing just to highlight for guidance and that kind of thing, the Farm Advisory Service, you can apply. They have a grant for getting a forestry consultant onto your farm, your croft or anything like that. So Anna, again, I'll send you a link for that. You can get up to £1,000 worth of free time just applying for the grant. Fairly straightforward to do that. And the last thing, this has been great, and now me working for Scottish Forestry had to set up a demo network. That was a wonderful thing to do. So we've got our first event next Wednesday, and then we've got one on the 17th of March. So please come along to that, ask your questions. We will have 2 host farmers who have done woodland creation on their farms, looking at different aspects, the processes, the benefits and everything like that. We'll have somebody talking and giving an introduction to the forestry grant scheme as well. Wonderfully, Anna, I'll send you those links in your follow-up email as well. And I've had a tremendous night. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lynn.
Yeah. Clem, I'm not sure if you had a second to invite everyone to participate in the Mentimeter for next week.
No, I haven't done that. So if you can add that in, that would be great. I was just
coming in to create more drama. I'm really sorry. But no, we wanted to invite you to vote in that link that we've just shared in Mentimeter. Just go to Menti and then code is 6649515. But it's for the next event. We would like you to give us ideas in terms of we have 8 topics that we would like to create discussion groups around and invite you to participate in them. So it would be really interesting for us to know which are the ones that you're most interested in or least interested in. So please go to Mentimeter and just rank them. It's going to be open as well for a couple of days, so we'll include it in the follow-up email.
Yeah, so the next agroforestry event is going to be on Zoom, and it will be much more interactive. So it will be small breakout discussions so that we can get to speak to people in more detail rather than this format. And yeah, we're really trying to decide what those topics are, and hopefully we can all have a good chat.
Oh no, I'm the only one left.
Oh,
No, Roger.
no, we can see you, Roger.
I can't see you guys anymore.
As you can hear us, it's fine.
The internet has had enough. The internet is like, no, make it stop.
So off we go for a glass of wine. But thank you, everyone. You have been such good guests, quite flexible to all this sort of technological drama that we've been having as well. So thank you so much. I know that I've enjoyed it thoroughly, and looking at the chat, everybody seems to have enjoyed it as well. There's millions of questions that are pending, but we'll try to address them on a follow-up email as well.
Yeah, and thanks to our amazing speakers. So they've been brilliant. Yay! And I'm sure you'll get lots of visitors as well on the back of this. So there'll be people chapping your door, hoping to come see what you're up to.
Lovely seeing everyone. And again, if you have any questions afterwards, feel free. You can always sort of like send us a mail or drop us a line. We'll be more than happy to try to connect you with the right people, send you the right information, or just answer your questions however we can. So thank you so much, and go and enjoy your evening, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye.